I was just thinking that every thought that we have in the form of an epiphany is basically just that thought or set of thoughts or the orientation of your thinking fully felt and understood as relative to and constraining something beyond that. The relativizing in our thinking and just the recognition of relativity is very closely, intimately connected and almost identical to the absolute which it uses to relativize itself. I was thinking of an example, and that example led me to this particular epiphany now. And that epiphany was, I was thinking about what it is that people, generally many Buddhists, are getting at when they use the word now, and they use it as a placeholder for what is real, most real, and so most holy as well, most actual, most needed of our attention. It compels us to pay attention to. It's a very common teaching in Buddhist thought. Pay attention to the now. What's happening now? Now. I agree, it's absolutely as good a simple thought and exercise as there probably is. Pay attention to the now. The problem is when it becomes less of an exercise, less of a thought, less of something that leads you to something else, and something that becomes its own dogma, where we have lines of inquiry seeking perhaps at first to discover the essence of what is now, and perhaps then leading to the skepticism of now after being rebuked by that line of inquiry, and then coming upon to say something like, well, there really isn't a present moment. Isn't everything the present moment? Saying stick to the now is just hocus pocus, whatever. That's new age bullshit, man. There is no present moment. And I mean, I think that's true. However, thinking in terms of a present, a future, and a past is extraordinarily elucidating, depending on your situation. If you're caught obsessing with the past or in fear of some unknown future, telling someone to bring their attention to the present moment, where fear or anxiety or guilt is relativized and washed in something greater, it's still extraordinarily useful and true as probably anything can be. And I mean, what is true is that proclamation that now is the realest moment. Now, language is always sloppy, and the referent point is not as clear as we'd like, especially if we're seeking definitive answers. But there's not really a definitive answer. There's not an answer. I mean, there's not a solution. And so it can't be definitive. But the example I was thinking of is just that now. I had the epiphany, well, maybe I shouldn't, and I had this same epiphany, thinking, well, is there a now? Can I dwell in the past and think about my memories, what was happening? And it made me realize, by doing that, I'm not compromising anything really about the present moment. I'm not going back and I'm going back on some truth, like ignoring it or pushing it aside or entering a moment of weakness or being incapable to rise to the challenge. It's just entering into a cycle. And really, in some way, going towards your memories, paying attention to where your impulses are guiding you, is in some sense paying attention to the present moment. And when I had that realization, I had really had an epiphany about a thought. That thought about time. Thinking in terms of time was, before that realization, at least immediately prior, had begun to begun to sink into me, into my skin, something I couldn't see anymore, but it was operating within me. This idea of paying attention to now, and it always being some sort of test for me. If I wasn't feeling great, I would say, am I paying attention to now? It was a very overused trope and position, and I hadn't realized how limited it could be, and how stale and kind of against its own point I could use it. And an epiphany just sort of rose out, and I saw how it took shape, how it took root in me, and directed my actions, directed my thoughts, caused my feelings. And the path to that epiphany was really nothing more than just allowing, kind of ironically, allowing the present moment, whatever was happening presently, to take a hold of me. And I think I'm quite certain that you couldn't even stick to that as a dogma. To say, okay, well, now I can modify my dogma slightly, and to move from saying, pay attention to now, the present moment, to saying, pay attention to whatever comes up, whether that's the past, making allowances. I'm kind of torn, because in a way it's building off of some foundation, a more basic and stripped down foundation, a more analytical one of there being like a now, abstractly, and adding a little bit of meat to it, some experiences that I can associate with it. An experience that kind of turns back on its head a bit. The experience is kind of brought about by, in some way, obeying that command, and by obeying that command, seeing the sort of relativity and context in it. When you take any thought to its fullest extent and bring it totally into itself, you see its limitations, and especially those thoughts that feel like conclusions and highlights. Even the conclusion to whatever I say now will surely be left up to relativization, contextualization. And it should be. I think there's a lot of good that comes about just sort of mixing yourself up, turning yourself round, paying close attention, and sort of moving inwardly like an electron circling itself, and taking that perspective, that of the electron just looking at itself, just providing energy inward.